Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be finalizing our top 10 coffees of 2024 list. This list was broken down into two parts, with yesterday's video featuring coffees 10 through 6, as well as any honorable mentions, and today's video will feature coffees 5 through 1. We do have two rules and restrictions for this list, the first of which being that we're not allowed to use the same coffee roaster more than twice, and the second being that we're not allowed to use the same coffee origin more than twice. As is tradition, I do have our first place coffee brew right here that I will be enjoying throughout this video. But for now, let's get back into this list with our 5th place coffee, which is the Bature family wash processed Kenya from Say Coffee out of Brooklyn, New York. And when this coffee was first released, it was the discussion of the coffee community as so many people were interested in it, given that it is a Kenyan Gesha. And like a lot of other people, I'd never had a Kenyan Gesha before, so I was able to justify the pretty steep price on this one, as it was $80 for 4 ounces, largely due to the fact that it would answer a question that I've had about Kenyan coffees for a very long time. Do they taste the way that they do because they are grown in Kenya, or do they taste that way because of the varietals that they do use? And this coffee would certainly go a long way in answering that, as this one was the most unique Kenyan coffee that we've ever reviewed up to this point, largely due to the fact that it really didn't taste like a Kenyan coffee in almost any way. This one offered an exceptionally clean, sweet, floral, and fruit-forward profile, all of which were different from what you typically experience from a Kenyan coffee. Now, a lot of Kenyan coffees tend to have that red florality, that kind of hibiscus-like or rose-like component to them, where this one right here was certainly a lot more on the chamomile side of things. In addition to that, the fruit profiles are often more reminiscent of tart berries, where this one was a lot more reminiscent of a fresh fruit melon. In addition to that, the sweetness was through the roof, and this was by far the cleanest Kenyan coffee that I'd ever had up to this point. And I know some people felt like this coffee was still pretty early in its development, as the best of this one was yet to come. That being said, I felt this coffee was already good as of this moment, as I would put it on par with some of the other legendary Kenyan coffees we've reviewed on this channel, like the Kianjege from Manhattan and the Ruby Batian from Colfea Circular. So this one was easily one of my favorite Kenyan coffees that we've ever had, and I was truly impressed by this one. All right, that takes us to our 4th place coffee, which is the Berhanu Dito, the natural processed Ethiopia from Wesson Gopi, based out of Shah Alam, Malaysia. And this one is our highest placing natural processed coffee. And usually when a natural processed coffee places this high, then it's very impressive. In addition to that, this is our highest placing standard offering, as this one is a non-Gesha or higher end varietal, as it's just a very standard natural processed Ethiopian coffee. Now, I've given the backstory behind this one a lot, and it's that we received a sample of the Ngise Gamera from Wesson Gopi that I enjoyed so much. It was my favorite natural processed Ethiopian coffee that I've had in years and years. I can't recall the last time I had one that I enjoyed as much as I enjoyed that coffee. Unfortunately, by the time I was able to purchase that coffee, it was sold out, so I waited for the next natural release from Wesson Gopi, which was this coffee right here, and I would say that it was near as good as the Ngise Gamera, which is to say that Ngise Gamera would be pushing the top 3, as both of these coffees do finish in this 4th place slot, as I did find them to be the best naturals that we'd had this year, and I often describe this one as being about 80% as good as the Ngise Gamera. That being said, we do have the Ngise Gamera, and we will be reviewing it in 2025, so certainly stay tuned for that review. That being said, aside from that, this coffee certainly stood out for being very traditional in the natural Ethiopian characteristics, as it was very much a blueberry bomb, and it was presented in a cleaner sense. And that's really positive, given that natural Ethiopian coffees this year have been on the up. I found them to be a lot cleaner than they had been in years past, but this one was by far the best of the bunch, as we had a number of really good ones. Even with those being as good as they were, this one was just that much better than the rest, as we didn't even have a natural Ethiopian in our honorable mentions list. So massive credit to Wesson Gopi. As mentioned in the previous video, they were one of my favorite discoveries this year. And that takes us into my other favorite discovery this year, which was H&S Coffee Roasters, and our 3rd place coffee, which is the Iridescence, a carbonic macerated wash processed Panamanian Gesha. And I should clarify that The top 3 coffees are all interchangeable, as I had a very difficult time discerning which coffee I wanted to place in which slot. Now there's a gap between our 4th place and our 3rd place coffee, as I found these top 3 to be just that much better than the 4th place coffee, even with the 4th place coffee being as impressive as it was. But that's to say that this coffee on a lot of years could have ended up as being our favorite coffee from the entirety of the year, as I was just massively impressed with this one. Now, before we start discussing the coffee itself, I did want to discuss H&S, as I found them to have one of the best years out of any coffee roaster that we reviewed this year. And that is largely due to a number of the coffees that didn't even make it on here, like the Ulysses Chombi, a wash-processed Bolivian coffee that I enjoyed quite a bit, and a number of coffees that did make it into that honorable mentions list, including Arashi, which is a coffee I felt could have scored even higher had we had an opportunity to try that one out after having had some experience with this coffee roaster. And the La Papaya Mejorada, which is a coffee I'd already mentioned, probably could have been pushing the top 5 itself if it wasn't restricted from making it onto the top 10 list itself. It's a little bit of a giveaway as to what one of the other coffees we have on this list is. But circling all of that back to this coffee, with so many impressive coffees from H&S this year, this one is one of the 2 that stood out by far the most, as it was immensely clean. I've never had a carbonic macerated anything that turned out as clean as this coffee was. And I've had iridescence before, I've had it from other coffee roasters before, and I've had it from other really notable and prominent coffee roasters before. But H&S is the coffee roaster that presented this one in the best way, as not only was it immensely clean, sweet, but it also offered tremendous florality and a wonderful fruit profile that was so unique in a lot of ways. I often describe this one as being reminiscent of Haichu, and I continue to remain steadfast in that assessment of this coffee, which is all to say that as far as Panamanian coffees go, I can't think of something like this done any better than the way that this coffee was, which is a massive testament to H&S. And obviously I want to give massive credit to Savage for this coffee, but as I've said, I've had this from so many other coffee roasters in the past, but this is the one that truly stood out by a huge distance, as I didn't think any carbonic macerated processed coffee could taste as good as this one did. So really wanted to highlight and emphasize this coffee, a truly special and spectacular one. And that takes us to our 2nd place coffee, which is the other H&S coffee, and that is the La Papaya Gesha, the wash-processed Ecuador from H&S Coffee Roasters, once again out of Laramie, Wyoming. And it was really difficult to kind of pick out between the 2, but I did have to go with this coffee as it was a much more traditional representation of the Gesha varietal, especially given that it was perhaps maybe slightly cleaner, though truth be told, both of which scored a level 5. I think the deciding factor on this coffee was the fact that it was a bit more reminiscent of my favorite coffees in general, offering a wonderful peach aspect to it and a wonderful florality. This one continued to score very high in what I look for in every coffee, which is great clarity, sweetness, intensity, florality, and a fruit profile. And given that this one did skew often in that peachy sense, then it's not surprising that I enjoyed this coffee as much as I did. This one set the benchmark for H&S, as I was so impressed with this coffee that it overshadowed a wonderful La Papaya Mejorada, which was near as good as this coffee, but this one just blew it out of the water. It blew so many other coffees that we had this year out of the water, and I know so many people also enjoyed this coffee. And it's really impressive the work that Juan Peña did this year, because we've highlighted a number of Juan Peña's coffees on this list, and this is the best of the bunch, as this one I found to be a true gem. Massive credit to Juan Peña. I feel like the fact that we've seen so many more wash-processed coffees from Juan Peña this year has certainly helped with my assessment of his coffees. As in the past, I've had so many more processed coffees, but it's really nice to know just what he's capable of with these wash-processed coffees and what H&S is capable of, because there's very little to nitpick about this coffee. This coffee is about as close to perfection for a washed Ecuadorian Gesha as I could imagine, so massive credit to them on this one. All right, and a quick break before we get into our 1st place coffee. And the moment of truth, our 1st place coffee is the Black Pearl WX, the wash processed Panama from Colfea Circular out of Gothenburg, Sweden. And it is very interesting. I have so much to say about this. Somewhat always a bridesmaid, never a bride when it comes to Café Circular, as they've never taken home first place in our top 10 coffees of the year list. They've come really close. They've placed on every top 10 coffees of the year list with the exception of our first one before we had ever had any of their coffees. And also interestingly, we've never had a Panamanian coffee finish first place, even though traditionally speaking, Panama is my favorite origin out there. Now, this coffee was just interesting right from the onset, as I essentially picked this coffee largely due to the fact that it sounded like my type of coffee. I really didn't know too much about it, and the name sounded kind of interesting, only to try this coffee and realize that it was an interesting combination of two types of things that I look for and enjoy so much within coffee. Let me start with this. This one was very traditional Panamanian geisha, as it offered that wonderful kind of grainy citric quality that you can experience in a slightly fruity pebble-like sense, which is usually why Panamanian geishas historically have been my favorite coffee in the entire world. But then combine that with a very unique and interesting fact that it was reminiscent of Lady Bermuda's of all coffees, which is one of the most iconic coffees that we've ever reviewed on this channel and one of the most notable coffees of the last 5 years. And the fact that it kind of combined two coffees in such a unique way was very interesting, as it was so clean and it didn't offer that somewhat weird artificial sugary taste that can come with Lady Bermuda's, as it was presented in a full clarity sense within this coffee. So having the best of both worlds when it comes to Panamanian geishas as well as the Lady Bermuda's was certainly a standout, and that's what slightly set it apart from the other coffees. The La Papaya geisha was very traditional. It was very much what you'd expect. Granted, it was about as well done as I could imagine for a coffee like that, and the iridescence far exceeded expectations for anything I'd had in that processing and still offered something unique. This one offered something unique for a coffee that was historic within this channel and within the last couple of years, also combining it with something that is my favorite profile in coffees altogether. And Café Circular did have an interesting year. I will say that. There has been a little bit of inconsistency, as some of the coffees we had from them, we just barely nixed off of our honorable mentions list, including the Mejorado WX, the Helix WX, some of the Mejorado coffees that they did release this year. And we also had a number of other ones from them that I very much enjoyed. That being said, we also had some coffees that I wasn't overly impressed by, some coffees that were very much out there as well. So all of that's to say, they still do a very good job with a number of their coffees, this one included, as at their very best, they are one of the very best coffee roasters for us year after year. And this one is an excellent example of that, as I took a sip of this coffee and I'm reminded why I enjoyed it so much and the moment that I did. It's very unique, it's very special, it's just so different, and I'm not sure if they'll have something like this again. It sold out pretty quick. I'm not sure if somebody got this coffee and was so impressed by it that they decided to purchase the rest, but it's one that I'll look for in the future because I can't quite recall or experience anything or expect anything to be reminiscent of this going forward. But yeah, that's it. That's our top 10 coffees of 2024 list. I'm going to leave it at that. I wanted to thank everybody that joined us this year, watched any of our videos, subscribed, contributed to any of our live streams. I greatly appreciate it. We're going to dive right back into this with 2025, as I'm looking forward to reviewing so many new coffee roasters this year and coffees, as it's such a wonderful journey. So thank you everybody that has contributed.